I'm here with Sophie Starwins from UK in the Changing Europe, and their group has done a huge research on where and how the ethnic minorities in the UK might vote in the general elections in July 2024. So thank you very much for your time, Sophie. First, tell me the size of the people you have interviewed, or just the size of your poll first.
So we've sampled about 7,000 ethnic minority voters in the UK, along with another large portion of the UK's white population, and so we've combined those to get quite a large sample size, which is quite unusual actually. In this country there's not actually a lot of data on how ethnic minorities tend to vote, and so this is one of the largest sample sizes that we've seen for quite a number of time. It's quite difficult to gather a lot of kind of reflective data on all the different ethnic minority groups that live in the UK, and so we've really tried to do that. We've tried to gather a big enough sample so that we can talk really accurately about how British Indian Hindus might differ from Indian Sikhs, and we can get down to that level of analysis.
Okay, so what are the answers and the predictions have you got for us?
I mean, what's interesting is that if we look at the UK's ethnic minority population, we see that as a bloc, a lot of tend to vote Labour. It's a very kind of strongly pro-Labour group. But what's interesting is that if you actually look at their economic preferences, their social preferences, a lot of ethnic minority groups, you wouldn't predict that they would vote Labour based on those preferences. Actually, they're more similar to, white conservative voters. And so what we really see is that diversity of social and political views doesn't really match up with the very consistent voting patterns that we see. Aside from that, we also see that some ethnic minority groups, in particular the British Indian population, is moving to vote in line with its economic and its social preferences at a faster rate than other groups. So we're seeing that British Indians, for example, tend to be more economically and socially conservative than other ethnic minorities, and we're seeing higher rates of conservative voting intention among that group as well. So they seem to be one of the groups that is shifting to vote kind of more in line with their actual preferences than other ethnic minority voting groups.
So we'll stick to the British, Indian origin people, and that would include the British Indians or British Asians as well as they are deemed under. So traditionally they were seen to be as Labour voters. Would you contradict that? And also, number two, they were seen to be moving towards the Tory party thanks to last time Jeremy Corbyn's comment on Kashmir. Now, tell me, in the light of this, where do they stand now?
So I think we are still seeing that shift probably among British Indians to the Conservatives. It was definitely sped up by Jeremy Corbyn's comments on Kashmir and that resolution that the Labour Party made. I think it was at the 2017 party conference. And it was also sped up by Brexit. We know that British Indians, more than any other ethnic group, voted to leave the European Union. Obviously 2019, the Conservative Party was the party to get Brexit done. And so we saw those two things sort of sped up that shift towards the Conservative Party. What we're not sure of is how fast, that movement towards the Conservatives from Labour amongst British Indians will be without those other two circumstances, particularly at a time when the Conservatives are just very unpopular overall in this country compared to the Labour Party. So, we are seeing that movement, but how fast it continues to be and at what point it becomes, a deciding factor in constituencies with high British Indian populations, that's something that we're not too sure about. And I think it's something we'll have a bit more information about after this election in July.
Yeah, brilliant. Has Keir Starmer done enough to mend bridges at all, and is that showing?
I mean, I think we've definitely seen him take a very sort of different position to what Jeremy Corbyn did, and in many respects, not just kind of on the Kashmir issue, but on anti-Semitism. Basically, with the Corbyn era, we've seen Keir Starmer's been very keen to sort of draw a line in the sand and separate himself, say this is a changed Labour Party, a new era for the party. So I do think that has made some amends, and I particularly think actually that the Labour Party making inroads inroads on its kind of how well voters think that the Labour Party can deal with the economy. You know, that's an issue that's very important to British Indian voters in particular, so I think that has done some work in restoring
But not very
that.
much.
But not a ton. I mean, it's one of those things where it's quite hard to tell at the moment because we're seeing such a big swing to the Labour Party amongst all populations. It's quite hard to work out. So maybe I think at the next election, when the Conservatives have made some recovery, there's not as big of a difference between the two parties, then we'll get a bit more of an idea of how much inroads has Keir Starmer made with, you know, ethnic minority voters overall.
Indeed. Now, in terms of swing vote, in the 2015 election, it was seen that there are certain seats that could be impacted by the vote, the way ethnic minorities or the BAME, or even in some seats, Indian origin people vote. Do you see such seats, and which are those?
I mean, we definitely do see seats, particularly in the Midlands of England, you know, places like Leicester as well, for example, where there's a high British Indian population and it's very concentrated in, you know, very specific parts of the country. Also, in places just outside London as well, in South London, you know, there's high levels. Places like Uxbridge, for example, there's quite a high Indian population. What that means is that, you know, that could be a very important voting bloc. If en masse British Indian voters who live in these seats decided to change their minds and not vote Labour and vote Conservative, that would be really make a big impact. However, at the same time, what we see is this change is quite slow, and I don't think it's reached a high enough number of voters to really be kind of a swing vote just yet. I think it's definitely more so than in 2015, but you know, it's still not quite at that point where these are a group of voters whose change in political views are really going to swing the results in these seats.
Rishi Sunak, how unpopular is he, and how much is his contribution towards the unpopularity of the party, and where do you think the British Indians are voting with regards to him, or is that impacting at all?
I mean, I think overall we know that Rishi Sunak is slightly more popular than his party. I think, you know, he's just subject to the fact that the brand of the Conservatives at the minute is so negatively viewed. They've had so many kind of scandals in the last 2-3 years. It would be really difficult for any party leader to overcome that difficult of a situation, that negative of a perception. So, you know, I don't think we can necessarily place all the blame on his door for not turning the Conservative Party's fortunes around, because he had such a difficult task to begin with. In terms of, you know, British Indian voters, we know that Rishi Sunak is more positively viewed by British Indians than any other ethnic group. So we know that is a factor, but at the same time, we know that most British Indians still say they're going to vote Labour at the next general election, even though we are seeing these high rates of Conservative voting intention among that group compared to any other ethnic minority group. I think at this moment in time, the Conservatives are just so unpopular that it's just not really having an impact on vote intention.
Oh, so you mean that their unpopularity, Tories' unpopularity, is taking over the fact that the Labour fiasco of Kashmir?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I think so. And as well with the change in leader as well of Keir Starmer, I think in a lot of voters' minds that's sort of drawn a line under that situation, and they see the party, the Labour Party, as being a changed institution. It's not the same one as it was under Jeremy Corbyn.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Sophie. That's very interesting indeed. And Sophie tells us that the British Indian vote, though it's not a bloc, and they tend to vote more towards the economic reasons and for all of these things, but yet in the larger scheme of things, the Tory party's unpopularity is taking over the Kashmir fiasco that had happened in the time of Labour when it was led by Jeremy Corbyn. So it looks like it is Labour largely for the British Indian or Indian origin people living in the UK in July 2024 elections as well. Lavina Tandon for India Today from London.